Hello everyone, welcome to the fourth episode of the DataSpot podcast. Today we are going to talk about rains.
The topic of rains is so wide. Poets write romantic verses around it. Mumbai local trains stop due to it. We all crave for hot pakoras with a chai. Farmers also wait for it in anticipation for weeks. And children and office goers pray for more rains so that they cannot go to schools and offices. If it rains, then also we have problem. And if it doesn't, then also we have got problems.
Yes, rains and our moods never match. Now you might wonder, what are we doing? Are we on a different podcast? But no, we are going to talk about rain and its impact on the agriculture economy. Now, before you think that this is a simple and let's skip this episode, let me tell you something. Agriculture is not as dependent on rainfall as you might think. Why? We will see in this episode.
The immediate trigger for doing this episode is that the monsoon rainfall this year is expected to be below normal. June is the first month of the monsoon season that lasts till September. And as of recording this episode, that is in the last week of June, the total rainfall received in June was 19% below normal. This has increased worries about what this might mean for agricultural output and its implications on inflation, interest rates, government policies, and so on and so forth.
So, as a first step, what we did is to see how closely correlated are rains and agricultural output. And we were in for a surprise.
In this chart, we are looking at in how many years has the rainfall been below the long-term average. And at the same time, for how many years the agricultural GDP has been in negative territory. For each decade, the long-term average rainfall is calculated as average rainfall for the preceding 50 years. That means for 1952 to 1961 decade, we calculated average rainfall from April 1901 to March 1951 and then calculate number of years in that decade where the rainfall is lower than the long-term average.
Here, we can see that in the last 3 to 4 decades, while the number of years that the rainfall has been below normal has largely remained stable. The number of times real agri GDP was in the negative territory has also reduced. Indeed, in the last decade, while there has been 7 years when rainfall has been below normal, agriculture GDP has declined in only 1 year, that is 2014-15. Going by what happened in the preceding 2 decades, agri GDP ought to have declined in 3 to 4 years, but that has not happened.
This suggests that the susceptibility of agri GDP to rainfall has reduced over the years, or that we can say that agriculture sector has become more resilient to rainfall.
Right. There is another data to check this out. Here we have plotted 10 years rolling average rainfall on the left hand side and 10 years rolling CAGR on real agricultural and allied activities GDP on the right hand side.
This chart shows that the rainfall has been like rainfall, very unpredictable. There are years of sufficient rains, but as you can see post 2000, the rainfall is deficient. But the growth in agri GDP has trended up. Over the past decade, agri GDP has grown at 4% CAGR in real terms, close to its highest ever, despite rainfall being below average in 5 out of 10 years.
This again corroborates what we observed above, that over the years, the agriculture sector has become less sensitive to rains. Even if the rains are erratic, its impact on agriculture is not as bad as it used to be.
We admit that this is a simplistic analysis. A lot of factors influence agriculture apart from just the quantity of rains.
Yes, viewers and listeners should note that we have also taken average rainfall all over India. The spatial or temporal distribution of rainfall also matters. But that has not been covered here because we want to give an easy explanation to make a broader point. I hope you will understand that.
So, the next logical question to ask is why has agriculture become more resilient to rains? Has something changed fundamentally? And the answer is yes. Over the years, several factors have made agriculture resilient to rains. We will discuss two in this episode. One is irrigation, and the other is composition of agriculture GDP. There are other factors at work such as cropping practices, better quality seeds, fertilizers, and so on and so forth.
So let us begin with irrigation. India has progressed a lot with regard to bringing more and more area under irrigation. After independence, around 23 million hectares of land were under irrigation, and this data is for all the crops. By 2019, we have brought more than 70 million hectares under irrigation. Also, out of total area under cultivation, 54% is now under irrigation.
Which means 46% is still dependent on rainfall.
Right.
Yes, 46% is a huge area, but if you consider the progress over the years, then you can see that we are becoming less and less dependent directly on rainfall. So irrigation is one of the major factors why the agricultural sector has been less dependent on rainfall.
Yes, obviously, crops which are rain fed or the regions with drought and flood conditions will get affected for a particular year. Also, the regional and crop level output and economies will have an impact for sure. But right now, we are focused on a macro level output only.
And as we are talking about the macro level output, let us understand the agricultural sector step by step. India's agricultural GVA stands at 45 trillion rupees in nominal terms and around 22 trillion rupees in real terms. Prima facie, we equate agriculture sector with farming alone. However, we fail to understand different components within agriculture sector.
Yes, and here comes our second factor that has resulted in strong agri GDP despite low rainfall. Agriculture has primarily four main elements. First is obviously the farming or crop output. The second largest component is livestock. Third, it is forestry. And finally, the last component is fishing and aquaculture. Over the years, the share of crop have been reducing both in real as well as nominal terms. Until 2010, it accounted for around 65% of total agriculture GVA. But by 2022, its share has come down to around 56%. On the other hand, we can see a gradual rise in livestock as well as fishing and aquaculture subsectors.
We sometimes forget that the sector's name is not agriculture alone. It is agriculture and allied activities. And recently, allied activities have shown higher growth than traditional farming. We can see that fishing activity has grown by 8% in the last decade, livestock by 7%, and output of crops just by 2%.
Right. So, the reason behind this is the changing demand patterns. As income levels are rising, people are consuming more protein rich items, which are included in the categories like livestock and fisheries. This also shows that these sectors are competent enough to cater to the rising demand. These sectors are less regulated compared to the crops. There is no price control on the output. There is no MSP. There are no mandis nor there are the APMCs. The inputs used by the two sectors too are not regulated.
Yes, this data hints that there is an ample of scope for policy maneuvering in this space. However, it also says that the allied activities have made the agricultural sector overall more resilient. Earlier, during bad monsoon years, things used to become worse. But now, with this kind of diversification, the economy can bear short term shocks in a robust manner.
Yes, the government can intervene and advise farmers to take on some allied activity along with the traditional farming.
Yeah.
This way, even farmers won't suffer from the vagaries of the monsoon.
Right. More awareness is needed, but even if there is no intervention, I think that farmers seem to have some engagements in allied activities. At least the data shows that they are embracing these changes.
So, overall, that means that when we hear news regarding deficient or delayed monsoons, which we are seeing this year, we should not think that agricultural economy is going to impact too much on a macro level.
Yeah, but there is one thing that we should be prepared of, and that is climate change. We must devise mechanisms through which we can feed the population if there is inadequate rainfall, plus make agriculture and allied activities sector more resilient to climate shocks, and at the same time make farmers wealthy. And these are going to be difficult challenges going ahead in our country.
True that. So, newer technologies that can increase yield in any temperature and conditions are needed. Water management should become a priority and awareness regarding allied activities must be addressed too.
Right.
I hope that we do it sooner.
Yes. So, on that hopeful note, we will wrap this episode. I hope you liked the episode. If you liked it, please press the like button, follow or subscribe to this channel, India Data Hub, and us on social media. And also share this with your friends and colleagues.
If you want a topic that you think we should address in this podcast, then you can also write to us on the email ID which is shown in the screen.
See you until next time. Thank you.
Thank you.